So, there's a huge trade agreement between the United States and India that's making headlines. In Washington, they're calling it a major victory. In New Delhi, it's a landmark deal. But if you go to the farmlands of India, you'll hear a very different word: betrayal. So what's really going on here?
And to really get a sense of what's at stake, just listen to this. This is a powerful warning from the Samyukt Kisan Morcha, which is the largest collective of farmer unions in India. It really just captures the massive stakes here, and it perfectly sets the stage for the controversy we're about to dive into.
Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, here's how we're going to break it all down. We're going to look at the agreement itself, then the spin from both governments, the actual fears of the farmers, whether the deal is even fair, and finally, what could happen next. We'll follow this story from the halls of power right down to the people on the ground.
All right, first up, the agreement itself. What's actually in this thing? It was announced back in early February 2026, right after a call between the US President and India's Prime Minister. And believe me, the terms are pretty extensive.
So what's the core bargain? Well, the US is dialing back some of its big tariffs on Indian goods, including a pretty controversial one that was tied to India buying oil from Russia. And what does India do in return? A lot. It's opening its markets, promising to buy over $500 billion worth of American stuff, and tackling other trade issues. That includes things like non-tariff barriers, all the complex rules and quotas, and also these digital services taxes India has on foreign tech giants. On paper, it looks like a pretty standard trade-off.
But, the ink was barely dry when the confusion started. A fact sheet from the White House mentioned tariff cuts for certain pulses. Now, that little phrase was nowhere to be found in the original joint statement. And that set off major alarm bells, because pulses, we're talking lentils, chickpeas, that sort of thing, they're a staple food for millions in India. It's a hugely sensitive part of their agriculture.
Okay, so now let's look at how this whole deal is being sold to the public. Because the way both governments are talking about it, well, it tells you everything you need to know about the politics here.
And this is where it gets really fascinating. You've got two governments telling two completely different stories. The White House is framing this as fixing an unfair system, a win for its America First agenda. But then in India, the government's calling it a historic victory that opens up the huge American market for its own exporters. See? Two capitals, two totally different narratives.
So, the governments have their official stories, but who isn't buying it? Well, that question takes us straight to the fields of India, where farmers and their unions are sounding a very, very loud alarm.
And this is really the central question, isn't it? If this deal is such a great win-win for everyone, why in the world has it led to calls for a massive nationwide general strike? A strike from the very people who form the backbone of India's entire agricultural economy.
The farmer unions have been crystal clear about their fears. They're worried about a flood of heavily subsidized American farm products hitting their market, which would totally crash local prices and make it impossible for them to compete. They're also raising red flags about genetically modified crops, the weakening of protections for India's huge dairy industry, and the fact that this seems to go against promises that agriculture would be kept out of these kinds of deals.
And look, this isn't some abstract, high-level threat. The unions are pointing to specific crops in specific regions. We're talking about soybean farmers in central India, apple growers up in the Himalayas, and dairy and poultry farmers all across the country. For millions of families, these aren't just headlines, they're deeply personal.
So is this exchange really fair? Well, the critics are saying that if you actually look at the data behind the deal, the playing field is, well, it's anything but level.
And this is a sentiment you're hearing from a lot of top economists like Jayati Ghosh. They argued that the whole deal is just fundamentally unbalanced. The main criticism is that the government is sacrificing the livelihoods of India's biggest employers, the farmers and small businesses, for benefits that might not even materialize.
Now this right here is the number that just stops you in your tracks. It gets to the very heart of the problem. Just look at the insane imbalance in government support. In the US, you have about 1 million farmers getting an average direct payment of over $30,000 each. In India, you have over 100 times more farmers, but the average payment is just $69. $69! How can Indian farmers possibly compete when one side is propped up so heavily? It's just not a level playing field.
And let's make this super practical for a second. Take soybean oil. If US imports suddenly become duty-free, they could land in India for a price that's way cheaper than what domestic producers can offer. And not only that, it would also undercut India's traditional suppliers from places like Argentina and Malaysia. One single change to a tariff can completely upend entire supply chains.
So you might be asking yourself, how on earth did we even get to this point?
Well, this deal didn't just appear out of thin air. It's actually the result of a really tense period of diplomatic friction.
This timeline really shows how bad things had gotten. It all kicked off in August 2025 when the U.S. slapped a 25% tariff on Indian goods. Then they added another 25% on top of that, this time related to India buying Russian oil. That's a crippling 50% total. Around the same time, there were reports, which were denied, that India was hitting back by freezing defense deals. Some analysts were calling it the worst crisis in 2 decades. So yeah, this trade deal was born out of some serious pressure.
And so, that's where we're left, with this massive, hanging question. Was this whole agreement a brilliant strategic move to fix a damaging diplomatic crisis, or was it a compromise made under intense pressure, a deal where the price is being paid by millions of Indian farmers? The answer to that is going to shape the future of India's farms, its food security, and its relationship with the United States for years to come.